On behalf of Hannon Hill and Beacon Technologies, welcome to our fireside chat regarding Google Analytics and how to harness the power. My name is Troy Singer, and I will be your moderator today. And really, that just means I'm going to navigate this conversation to give you the information in a formal but fun way. We're going to start out with introductions. Then we're going to go into some questions that'll get the information to you. I also want to let you know that there is a question and answer portion at the end, but there's also questions and answers that you can put into the chat section below, or should I say the Q&A section. So for our panelists, they're going to give a brief introduction, starting off with Andrea. And Andrea, I think you're prepared to let us know a little bit about yourself and something on your desk that is interesting that you can share with our clients.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Andrea Cole. I'm with Beacon. I am the VP of Digital Optimization. So me and my team are responsible for all of the SEO and Google Analytics setup and management that Beacon does for our clients. And specifically, me and my team do all of the universal and GA4 setups and conversions currently happening. And then as far as what's on my desk, there was a couple options, but I think I'm going to go with my Minion candy jar. This is actually a Halloween candy jar, but I've got all kinds of stuff in here. I got people coming in and out all the time, just stopping in a chat, having some candy.
That is great. And before we go on to our next panelist, I wanted to point out that I believe Beacon was one of the first partners that Google chose to go or to unveil Google Analytics with. Can you briefly let everyone know about that?
Yeah, so way back in the beginning stages of analytics, it was all based on Urchin code. And at that time, Beacon kind of identified that this was a blooming area of digital marketing and really started to partner right as Google acquired Urchins. We're in like that beginning stages of analytics occurring. And then they also create a partner program. What the partner program is with the analytics is we get access to Googlers and special announcements and releases, and also give input on product development. And we're the longest standing company with that relationship with Google. So back in I think 04, 05 when that first started, up and through today, we've been a partner with Google as they kind of evolved digital analytics.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Jordan, you are up.
Sure. So I'm Jordan Burleson. I am the VP of Digital Advertising here at Beacon. Just celebrated my 10th year at Beacon, and I'm kind of Andrea's counterpart. There's two different wings of our digital marketing team here. So anything that dabbles in paid advertising, whether it's Google Ads, Microsoft Ads, paid social, anything with smart television advertising, anything in that realm is what I dabble in. And in terms of what's on my desk, I've got a lot of stuff on my desk. The one that I chose is my Hot Wheels Oscar Mayer Wienermobile, which I think they're trying to change the name, but it's always the Wienermobile to me.
I'm going to have to Google what that name is going to, but I'll do that after the webinar. Last, from Beacon Technologies, we have Christy Phillips.
And I'm Christy Phillips. I am our VP of Project Management here at Beacon. I have been here just about 6 years, and our team kind of manages all the work that comes through Beacon. So, making sure that all of our clients are happy and the work is getting done. As for what is on my desk, there, like Andrea and Jordan said, there are a lot of things. Don't think I can beat the Wienermobile, but I do have a fraud calculator that is missing an eyeball. So, that is weird in and of itself. So I think that's what I'm going to have to run with.
But it stood the test of time, so.
It has.
Thank you. We're now going to move on to the team from Hannon Hill. Graham, it's your floor.
Awesome. So my name is Graham Lewis. I'm the senior sales engineer here with Hannon Hill. I just celebrated my 8th year at Hannon Hill. So as the sales engineer, what I do is I basically do all design and development work for our sales team. So doing basically anything that you see as a part of a demonstration of the CMS is something that I have created and developed. As far as the interesting thing on my desk, I was going back and forth between baseball cards and this thing, but I have picked my little kitty headphone. It's like for my earbuds for my Apple AirPods. They let us sit on this little cat. She mainly just looks like she's dancing. And I don't ever put the headphones on her, but she just kind of sits there and stares at me.
Love it. Thank you, Graham. And last but certainly not least, Chris.
Yeah, hi, everybody. First of all, welcome to this webinar. Thank you for being here on behalf of Hannon Hill. To everybody who's attending this webinar and to everybody who attended our last webinar, thanks for being part of this webinar series. My name is Chris Raposa. I'm the marketing specialist for Hannon Hill. We're the makers of Cascade CMS. We're a web content management system that delivers personalized visitor experience and generates results. We also have a tool, personalization tool called Clive, which integrates with any CMS out there to show targeted content to your audiences so that visitors can see the content that's most relevant to them. And now I'm going to take off my marketing hat for the rest of this webinar and tell you this is my little music box. Unfortunately, you may not be able to hear it, but it has the tune of Vivaldi's Four Seasons Spring. So it's sentimental to me. If you want to learn more about it, connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to share that story.
Thank you very much. And I've learned through this exercise that I don't have anything interesting on my desk, interesting or unusual, other than things I need. So I'm going to have to step up my game for our next fireside chat. We are going to have a poll question to give the panelists an idea of how many of our attendees have already migrated to Google Analytics 4. We're going to take about 10 seconds. If you could please put in your vote within the poll. I'm seeing about 47% yes, no 14%, and the remaining 39% in progress. So thank you very much. Which I think to set a foundation, Chris, if you could answer for us, what is the difference between Universal Analytics and Google Analytics 4 and even Google Tag Manager? If you can give us a sense of, just make those differences for us to get us started.
Sure, I'm happy to. I'm going to start and I'm going to touch on three differences first between Universal Analytics, which I'm going to call UA, and then Google Analytics 4. So I'm going to touch on the data collection differences, the cross-platform tracking differences, and the session calculation. So first of all, with the data collection, in UA, the UA uses the following data models. So it uses the users, the sessions, and hits. So for example, when a user comes to your website, identified as a user, it starts a session and then records each action as a hit. And these actions can be in form of page views, button clicks, and a single session can have multiple hits depending on how the user interacts with your website. Now, with GA4, on the other hand, and it's a big buzzword, and you hear that everywhere. You look at Google Analytics for YouTube videos or content, it's an event-based model. So each interaction is a hit, or hit is a standalone event, whether it's a page view, a button click, a user engagement, which gives GA4 more flexibility and accuracy when tracking user behavior. So that's the data collection part of my talk. And let's go to cross-platform tracking. That's also huge. So in UA, there were two kinds of properties. There was UA for measuring websites, and GA Firebase, which measured mobile app activities. Now with GA4, that offers a cross-platform journey, giving you the ability to track users across different platforms, whether it's your website, iOS app, Android app, etc. If your website offers user login to create user IDs. Now, you may ask yourself, how are website visitors identified in GA4? So like I just said, it uses the user ID if you create your own IDs for signed-in users, so you can use this data to accurately measure the user journey across different devices, whether it's the website or the app. Google Signal, which uses the data from users that are signed into their Google account. So a lot of people have Google accounts, right? So when they go to your website, and they're logged into their Google account, whether it's on their browser or on their app, it'll track it that way. And then the good old device ID, which comes from a user's browser marked by a GA cookie. And then thirdly, I'm just going to briefly touch on the session calculations. In UA, a session represents a period of time that a user actively, okay, we're talking about actively engages with a site, and there are a few things that end a session. So it's 30 minutes of inactivity, the clock passes midnight, strikes midnight like in Cinderella, or a user leaves the site and then comes back to a site. And in GA4, it's similarly to UA, Universal Analytics, right? A session ends after 30 minutes of inactivity if you're on that page, But if you have multiple tabs open, let's say you have that website and you browse, jump over to another tab, and you're not active on that page, GA4 detects that the browser window isn't open, and then it stops that timer. And the other key difference is that sessions now carry over across midnight, not automatically starting a new session. So that's especially relevant if you have a global audience, because starting a new session after midnight can cause discrepancies in session figures. And we all know sometimes our traditional students, millennial, no, I'm a millennial, I shouldn't say that. What is it? The generations, is it Gen Z? Yeah, Gen Z. They like to stay up late, so and browse the websites and look for their their desired colleges. And then just briefly before I hog this section, Google Tag Manager is like a toolbox for your website. So GTM manages different tools like Google, AdWords, Facebook pixels without having to mess with your website's code. So all you have to do is you add one piece of GTM code of different instead of different codes depending on the the tracking to your analytics. So that's my spiel on this section. So Beacon, take it away.
Well, Chris, you did a pretty thorough explanation. I'll just add a couple key pieces. When it comes to analytics and why Google's doing this, moving to GA4, because this is probably one of the most drastic redesigns in analytics tracking, Google's ever done. They've been essentially using the same concepts and the same approach to digital analytics since they acquired Urchin in 2005. So it was long overdue for an overhaul, especially considering how different the web is now and how people shop cross device. And so they have redesigned it so that it does work better, measuring cross device, cross platform, or cross, when you go from laptop to desktop, not just, and then from between browsers. But then they've also, everyone's aware that there's privacy concerns and what's done with your data. And as governments are starting to really enforce data controls and privacy, they had to build that in. They had to build in a way, because it wasn't present in Universal Analytics, where you can give end users control over the data. And so that's a big part of it too. Machine learning, everyone's hearing Chat GPT and AI, that's built in now, which is new. And it was it was available in the previous version of analytics, but was used in a very minor fashion. Now it's kind of a core part of that computing. You can collect way more data. So in old version of analytics, you couldn't collect as much data. You kind of had to be skimpy and really think through how much you collect, because if you have too much in there for analytics to process, it would give you sample data, which is basically just a cross section. It's not all your true data, which can sometimes lead to things not looking the way you'd expect. And then also, GA is now starting to put the onus on the actual website owner for data. So GA4 doesn't save data as long. It saves it only for 14 months. So Universal Analytics time, you can go back to the beginning of time, or your analytics time and Universal. Can't do that in GA4 anymore. It only saves it and then it purges it at month 15. So that's another issue happening. So there's some core differences, but a lot of it was just to, it's essentially they hadn't refreshed, they're giving themselves a redesign in like 15 years. And so it's time for them to do that. And that's what GA4 is. And then a lot of clients are wondering what Tag Manager is. We call it GTM, it's Google Tag Manager. And Chris kind of touched on that too, but it's basically a control panel for anything you want to add to the web that's code. So instead of going in and manually editing your website, you have Tag Manager. It's a dashboard you go into and you basically insert the code in Tag Manager, and then there's one single code line that goes into your site, and then you can add and remove code at will if you go into the Tag Manager dashboard. And what this means is that you get your developer or whoever's doing your development to add the Tag Manager container to your site one time. And then without needing an additional technical skill, you can add and remove things from your site. So if you want to put heat mapping on your site, if you want to add a tracking pixel, if you want to, make adjustments to your Tag Manager tracking, you can do all that. Analytics tracking. You do all that within Tag Manager without having to go to a developer each and every time to make those changes. So those things together, Tag Manager and GA4, that's how we're implementing GA4 for our clients. We always use Tag Manager.
Andrea, can you briefly touch on why GTM is recommended and important?
Yeah, I mean, first off, it just is a more streamlined and efficient way to manage your tags. So, like way back, I think 5 or 6 years ago, maybe even more now, you'd have to add things line by line. So if you wanted to track a button, you had to put some tracking code around that. And that was really prone to having code rewritten, dropped, added incorrectly. So you didn't just have the process of figuring out what to track, you then had to also manage the tracking code in a bunch of different places on big sites. Tag Manager now simplifies that. So you've got one spot to do that. It's more efficient. It's you make your tracking more secure because it's less likely to be full of errors. And it also gives you the ability to not just manage your analytics tracking code. I mean, if you want to do heat map tracking with Hotjar or Crazy Air, you want to input a survey, have that pop out. There's a million things that you can do with Tag Manager outside of just the overt tag tracking. That really, it's just a beneficial method to go ahead and add code to your site when you need to do it at will.
So Andrea, why is this such a hot topic right now?
Well, I'm sure everyone's aware, especially if you've logged into Google, because they're just ringing all the alarms now with all the red banners and things that pop up. But come July 1, Google is going to stop processing universal analytics data and only process GA4. And what that means is that all of the universal analytics code on your site will no longer send data in. So that will just completely drop off. So if you don't have GA4 running, you're going to be flying blind on your web analytics.
Thank you. Chris, I would like to ask, Andrea did a good job of giving us the importance, but
Sure.
Are there any other benefits that you see of GA and the tracking that it will have?
Yeah, so first of all, I think Google strongly recommends users to manually migrate universal analytics settings to GA4. And where I've read, and correct me if I'm wrong, Andrea, if users do nothing, a new GA4 property will automatically be created for them, and their universal analytics configuration will be copied to the new GA4 property. And you have at least 6 months, and that's not a date set in stone by Google, to export your universal analytics data before it's permanently deleted. So I wouldn't procrastinate on that, because you don't want to rely on Google. They may just cut it off, and then all of a sudden you're losing all your data and you cannot refer back to it, because if you haven't switched over to Google Analytics 4 yet, it starts fresh. It's like there's nothing about your website on Google Analytics 4. So you want to have that data so you can compare for the next months or a couple of years to come.
Yeah, that's true. They're saying November-ish is when they will basically expunge all universal data, and you'll only have GA4 to look at. Although that's like a loose date. It's not as published, but yeah, they've come out and said that they'll convert what you've got over to GA4. I'm not a fan of that. I don't trust that. Kind of like, to a certain extent, it's garbage in, garbage out. It's also unclear to me what profiles and settings they're looking at to do that. So, you know, and also it's not going to be the best integration. And so when I say you're flying blind, I mean the data that you're going to have in GA4, if you just let it manually roll over, is essentially akin to flying blind, because you've had no input into how your web analytics is put together, which is, you know, how do you trust that then?
Yeah. And then Troy, you asked me about some of the benefits for Google Analytics or tracking in general. So The reason why you want to be implement Google Analytics for analytics in general is to understand the path exploration. So the pathways in Google Analytics 4 help you better understand the prospect's journey, to visualize the flow a user takes on your website. It's pretty basic, but if you haven't done it before, it's not that basic. So it helps you to identify users from awareness to consideration to evaluation all the way to enrollment. And this helps you create a hypothesis to optimize those steps, leading to a more data-driven decision-making and enhanced operational efficiency, as well as improved student and recruitment and retention. So that's what it's all about in the end, right? If you hire a marketer, you want to make sure you get those students into your your institution. And then of course the cross-platform tracking with GA4, that's beneficial that you now can measure the interactions people have with your institution across different devices. If you're anything like me, you may sit there at your desk looking at a website, and then you move over to your TV watching Ted Lasso or something and scrolling through your phone on the website trying to find the perfect major for you at the perfect university. So that gives you a complete, relevant, and timely understanding of a student's journey. So that's some of the benefits that associate.
Yeah, I definitely think that data-driven decision making is kind of like the all-encompassing answer, right? Like your higher education institution, a lot of that is based on research, and so it makes sense to just have data-driven decisions after that. Another thing that comes out of the data is that there are findings that you'll have that you wouldn't have found had the data not been available. So a lot of cases when we're going through redesigns or we're doing digital marketing for higher education clients, those are the things that come up. It's like, there's these micro trends that happen. And if you have your digital analytics set up properly, you can actually dig through and find them. And then they also do help get past some of the assumptions or their personal opinions, especially in redesigns that crop up, and start making decisions based on what's actually happening, what your students are telling you, versus kind of like what the internal audiences think and feel, because the website's for students, it's not for the faculty and staff, and it's for mainly perspective, and so the data really helps you get to that.
Wow, thank you. So I think you've done a thorough job of going through the what, the when, and the why, and I'm going to ask Jordan to kind of chime in. What are our next steps? What should they be? And I guess I'm thinking, if we're creating enough urgency, what should our attendees be doing directly after getting off this webinar and making sure that they get accomplished before July 1st?
I would say work really well hand in hand with whoever is handling this transition. If you don't have someone in mind, it's really, really a smart idea to reach out. Beacon's an agency, you may have other agencies that you're working with. Just basically ask those questions. What's the plan that we have in place for the Google Analytics 4 transition? I always put the paid hat on just because that's where I live. And just to piggyback on what Andrea mentioned, one of the things you don't want to do, even though it's nice and a good fail safe, is just to let Google do it for you. This is one of my biggest rubs with Analytics 4 is that if they make that switch, chances are their conversions that are set up in analytics, if you have conversions set up in Universal right now, when they switch, they're going to count per event as opposed to session. It may not make sense to anybody that's on this call. I'll try to put it in layman's terms, which is, imagine if you have a student coming to your site that is requesting information or is hitting apply now. If they hit that button 5 times in the default method, that's 5 conversions, when in reality, it's one student that did one thing. So you have to manually go in and make those changes and say, no, we want to count it like the old way. And it'll even tell you when you change that counting method, what that means. And it's going to say this is more similar to the universal method. So that's something you want to do. There's a lot of paid items that you have to do too. You want to make sure that you do this before the cutoff, because if you have ads running and you're using Google Ads as a platform to push data to analytics, you need to have your conversions set up in Analytics 4 and have them imported into Google Ads. You're going to have universal conversions and the exact same GA4 conversions running concurrently in your Google Ads account. It gives Google Ads time to say, how do these people complete these conversions in GA4 compared to Universal? And you can set one of them as primary, one as secondary, and having an agency or having someone that knows what they're doing is a really good idea to make that switch as painless as possible.
Thank you. Are there any other comments before we move on? Well, then, Jordan, I would like to ask, how long will it take to implement a GA4 transition?
Andrea can couple on this question as well, but we're seeing one of the things I would say is it may seem like it's something you can do in a couple of weeks. We've found for the full thing to take place, it's more like a couple of months. So right now is the time to take action if you have not, knowing that July is the date. So I would say just assume it's going to take from now until the deadline to have everything set up correctly, because you can get base tracking, you can get conversions, you can get some of the configuration on the back end set up relatively quickly. But what's going to happen is you're going to see data stream in and have to make extra changes and adjustments as the data comes in and you say, oh, this is different, or we didn't account for this, or this other school or department wants access to something. We need to go in and create that. So then you're set up really well the time July comes around. So don't sleep on this, or else you will get burned pretty bad and have to scramble at the last second.
Thank you. I would like to ask Andrea, what are some of the common tracking and GA issues that you are seeing, especially within the higher ed vertical?
So one of the big things that we see a lot is issues with third-party integration. So usually things like Ellucian, Slate, those are less of an issue. In some cases, depending on how they're installed on the site, there may be hurdles. But a lot of the things that we kind of get stuck on is just not having a really good site architecture and content design. So things like, we try to set up tools for audience segmentation so we can measure the amount of prospective students and measure current students and measure faculty, alumni, staff. So we kind of understand when we go into the data, this audience is using this part of the site or that part of the site, and this or that helps them convert or does not. If your site's not set up to help make that distinction, then it's really difficult to build those audiences and get the full power of Google Analytics. But other things are simpler. Things like not having enough conversion points, phone numbers that are not clickable, email links that are not clickable, the lack of conversion points, no apply calls to action on program pages, lack of into content forms, things like that really hinder your ability to fully track and understand what's going on the site. And so when Beacon sets up a GA4, it's not just like taking the site at the face value and saying, okay, well, you've got these features, this is what we track, it's good, and then we move on. It's also a consultation like, hey, these things are not set up properly for us to track it, so we should make these changes, we make those recommendations, as well as saying like, there's not enough calls to action here that we need to track. So it's kind of, when we're doing these things, there's kind of the side benefit of you get the consultation on conversion optimization, because we're looking for those conversions to track for you so we can make sure that the site is performing properly. So it's things like that we typically run into that are the most time consuming, third party, and then consulting on areas where there isn't a good conversion point and turn that into a good conversion point. Those are the things that sometimes make setups take longer. But in the end, if we can get past those things, the value you'll get out of your setup is by far worth the extra time it takes to get those things working properly.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, Andrea. Thank you for sharing. And I did a little bit more research on this question as well, more of a high-level overview for institutions at large. Came across a EDUCAUSE Center for Applied Research paper, and it states that higher ed institutions track more data than ever before. But you ask yourself, what kind of data? And it's usually data that satisfies credentialing and reporting requirements rather than strategic questions, right? So analytics is mostly used in areas of enrollment management, student progress, and institutional finance, like kind of leaving the higher ed marketers there on the side. With the reasoning and the barriers may be cost, and you may ask yourself, why cost? Google Analytics 4 is a free tool, but it's either investing into an in-house analytics professional or outsourcing it to a vendor like Beacon to collect and translate the data for the institution. Now, if you skimp on that part, you run into several issues of opportunity cost, like inaccuracy of an incomplete data collection, cross-domain tracking issues. You know, many higher education institutions have multiple domains and multiple subdomains, and there's also difficulty tracking multiple audiences, you know, your prospective students, current students, faculty, etc. And the most important thing is the underutilization of Google Analytics features, because you don't know what you don't know, which results in a lack of insights into user behavior, especially with the upcoming demographic enrollment cliff, which you know, you need to be aware of too. You need to know where those students come from and where that switch is, so you can pivot to other areas of the United States or internationally.
That's a great point too, Chris, because of what I'm hearing from a lot of our clients, and to take this from a different perspective, is, you know, there's a lot of downsizing going on in higher education at the moment. And so folks that traditionally are not in a marketing role are now being placed in these marketing roles, trying to understand, you know, what is GA? What is GTM? How do I convert to GA4? What do these numbers mean? What do these numbers mean in comparison to old reports that I was seeing in Universal Analytics? So I think from the other side of the fence, that's the other perspective that our clients are now facing too, is with kind of, you know, changing in roles and environment, that folks are downsizing and are now having to play a bigger role than they used to.
Thank you, Christy. I'd like to also ask, how is GA or the tracking integral to the effective paid advertising campaigns? And
All right.
if
Yeah, I can absolutely chime in here. Sorry,
Thank
I was
you.
trying to get off mute there. So one of the things that's really important, and we stress to all of our clients, is don't run paid at all. Don't turn it on without tracking. For me, it's just wasted money. You might as well just be burning those advertising dollars if that's the case. So, which may sound extreme, but it really is. Like, you have no idea if that page is leading to everyone landing and leaving, which in effect is really wasting all of that money. But you do want to make sure to have those effective campaigns. You have tracking set up. You want to make sure you have conversions set up. The nice part with Analytics 4 that was true with Universal 2 is you could set up events and conversions. Conversions being those things that are really important to you. Things like apply now clicks or apply now completions, or people requesting information, or interacting with financial aid and downloading documents, or emailing a program lead for one of the schools on one of these higher ed sites. Those are all great examples of conversions, and having those set up before you run paid campaigns let you know that your dollars are being used wisely. But you can also set up events, and these are things that are maybe secondary to conversions, things that are important to say, hey, they interacted with 3 or 4 pages on the site before leaving. That's important just from an engagement perspective. Or maybe the financial aid piece there is better suited for those events, where you can say, hey, they interacted with financial aid. In analytics, we can see for those people, that subset of users that interact with financial aid, did they convert at a higher rate? Did we shorten the amount of time from their first interaction with their higher education site to them filling out an application if they interacted with financial aid from paid advertising? So those things are really important to make sure that your paid dollars are used wisely.
Well, then I think the next question would be, what makes a good landing page for tracking and paid advertising?
I can tackle this one as well. I know Graham has some things that he wants to mention on this one too, but a good landing page is a landing page that doesn't exist by itself, that has friends. I mean, that's the best possible way I can put it. So one of the things I do not like, and that I encounter a ton when doing different sales presentations to higher ed, is the idea of siloed landing pages, which is typically a marketing agency tactic. It's a way for them to set up their own tracking. It's a page that kind of looks like your higher education site, but isn't. And once they get there, they have one thing to do. They can fill out a form. They can read very basic information about your institution or about your program and nothing else. So the number one thing to say that makes a good landing page is it not being siloed. Let them interact with other parts of the site. The keywords that you set up to bring them there may seem like that program's the best fit, but maybe an online only program, or maybe a certificate course is actually a better option for that user. You wouldn't know that with a siloed landing page. Well, all you would know is that they went there and then they left, and then you have no other data on that user. So make sure, number one, that they can access other parts of your site, other programs, and other things to build trust with your college or university.
And to kind of piggyback off of that, I've had experience both with landing pages inside of the CMS, and when I was a client of Hen and Hill, we had a marketing agency that created a landing page outside. So to kind of go off of that siloed thinking and the negative aspect of that, a lot of people realize that they're not on your website anymore. They understand that they've been taken somewhere that is unfamiliar. A lot of times you want to maintain what we call internally a source of truth. You want to make sure that as you're updating content within your main website, that content on those landing pages is also updated. I think content is the most important. You want to make sure that they're able to get access to what they want. Again, those next steps, and that I think what Jordan said, a page needs friends. You need somewhere to go. So you just need to make sure that the content is engaging, and it just gives them a sense of what to do, where they're going, and that they get something out of it.
And the last thing I'll say here is I've got a great story. This has happened, I think, for 2 or 3 different clients of ours. We've worked with University of Houston, Wake Forest University, Lincoln Memorial University. These are 3 that come to mind that this exact thing happened, where we looked at the landing page before we turned paid on. We had tracking set up and everything was ready to go, but the page was just not great. There was nothing for them to do. It's just content. There were no email links. There were no buttons. There were no next steps. So we said, hey, you need to give them options. Don't assume that they're ready to apply now, but give them something else to do. Maybe another page to visit or an action to take. So they went in, updated these landing pages. They, put some buttons in there. They broke up the content where it was easier to read and digest, and did a better job of internally linking, which helps Andrea and the SEO team over there. But and then once they did that, they contacted and said, the ads are working great. And then I emailed back and said, we have not turned them on yet. It was just that the page converted so much better. They assumed that the advertising. And then when we turned on advertising, they were having a hard time keeping up with all the traffic that they were getting. So just another good example of making sure people have opportunities, that you're not prejudging every single user that comes to your site and assuming that you know what they want to do.
Thank you, which you've perfectly set up our next poll question, which is, are you satisfied with your landing pages conversions and results from your paid ads? We're going to give it about 7 to 10 more seconds. Thank you. And as we see, there are only 14% that are satisfied, another 22% that they aren't satisfied, 23% of sort of, but the majority don't use them. So we thank you for your feedback. We have another poll question. How many of your landing pages are siloed? How many of your landing pages are siloed? Mm, 12% all, 34% none, and then 54% some. So we appreciate that, and that gives our panelists a perspective as we move on through the questions that we have. Our next question I'm going to pose to Graham, and that is, why is Cascade CMS important to this conversion?
I mean, it's vital. You need to make sure that you have a CMS that's able to handle the creation of those landing pages, able to make it easy for content contributors to not only create the content, but also share that content amongst all of the other pages in the system. Again, going back to those pages need friends. You need to make sure that you're not only focused on the landing pages. Once they get to the landing page and they have those call to actions to go to the other pages within your site, you want to make sure that it's cohesive. You want to make sure that the voice on all of those pages is the same. So you need to make sure you have a CMS that allows for content contributors to easily go in and update that content. It goes back to the source of truth that I was talking about before. You need to make sure that, you've got one spot where all of it comes from. If you're sharing content from one page, you need to make sure you're sharing it to all of your pages, tagging and getting that content where it needs to be.
Thank you. Are there any other comments from the Hannon Hill side before we move on?
I'm sure Beacon too may be able to chime in on some of that stuff. I know they've done a lot of work with Cascade and some of our clients helping with that as well. So I'm sure I see Jordan nodding his head. So I'm sure other people have things that could chime in from the Cascade side.
Please.
Yeah, so I think it kind of leads into our next question about, our common questions that we get from our clients about this topic. And really, a lot of times I get phone calls that say, hey, my landing pages aren't accurate. The information isn't correct, and I can't get in there to change them. Why can't I get to them? And it goes back to what we just talked about, because they're siloed and they're built over in a microsite, or it's a single page, and they can't get in there and make the changes that they could easily make in the CMS. And it's that interaction is, not great at all. And so, that's a point of frustration, is inaccurate data. The second piece is, Graham and Jordan already alluded to, is, we hear commonly, well, I'm getting great results from my other marketing firm on this campaign. Our engagement rates are really high. Well, you're sending them to one page. So you have to understand, you're sending them to one page with one thing to do, and you're not letting them browse the rest of your site. And so you're not getting true data from that, because you don't know what else they've engaged with, because you've only given them one option. And then the other point that isn't getting reported to you is that they also have very high bounce rates. So if you sent that person to that page and that's not what they wanted to do, that person has now left, but you don't know how many times that has happened, because that's the data that a lot of people don't want you to know. So that's why it's really important because we get a lot of these questions like, well, my marketing firm's doing this. Are you guys doing that? Are you doing this? Are you doing this? Why can't I touch my content? And it's because it's all over the place and it's in different places, and it really needs to be centralized, and people need as much freedom as possible to browse the site. And that goes back to what Graham and Jordan have talked about with friends and truth.
Well, and I think it goes back to, like I'd said before, I think people understand that they're on a landing page that's not on your website. They understand that they're somewhere that's not familiar. So as long as, I think making sure that it fits in seamlessly is important, because people are aware, people can see that. And that's probably where a lot of the bounce rate comes from. As soon as they hit that, they go, I'm not on the website anymore. And they just exit.
Yep.
And an important thing to ask an agency that's doing this, they'll probably give you answers like, well, it's better for the paid results because our keywords match better. Well, you can use paid data, organic SEO data, and the content on your website, and use those in tandem to make that performance better. You don't have to rely on those siloed pages. You can look at the content on that page and work in 2 or 3 of your top traffic paid keywords, top traffic organic keywords organically into your content, which may give you more content to rank for and help your site rank organically, but it'll improve your paid performance. So you don't have to rely on some of those tactics. I mean, there's SEO like black hat tactics that exist. There's paid tactics that are also kind of icky in a way that we try to stay away from. And even though it is a quick and easy win, in a lot of cases, it takes a lot of the control away from you, the college or university.
Yeah. Another common question we get too is, while people are redesigning, they want to know, is my Google Analytics setup going to carry over, right, to my redesign? And are my redirects going to stay in place, which is always really important from an SEO perspective. And the answer to that is kind of mixed. It depends on how you develop the site, how you build the site, but I would never trust that I would carry over. I would always double check and make sure that you're still collecting data and that all your goals and conversions have carried over the way that you want them to, because you are redesigning it as a chance to take a look at the data and make sure that you are collecting everything you want to collect. And redirects are a whole different discussion outside of this, but sometimes no, your redirects won't carry over if you've changed folder structure, page names, and things along those lines. You have to create new redirects.
Thank you, Christy. That is a wonderful way of bringing that question to a close and moving on to our next one, which is, what are you seeing out there for reporting and data consumption that are requirements within higher ed? And I'm going to ask Andrea to take this on.
So there's kind of two main ways you can access the data. You can go into Google Analytics itself and access the reports there. Or you can set up Data Studio or Looker Studio. Well, it used to be called Data Studio, it's now called Looker Studio dashboards. And this actually dovetails nicely with the question in chat about the loss of views in Universal Analytics. So in GA4, they give you a lot more control over your reports. So you can customize everything in that the left gutter there, all those reports. You can add and remove, customize, create new libraries. And so if you're comfortable letting people into analytics itself, you could create a report for them there that's just subsections of a site or specific things they need to see. For most colleges and universities, though, they're used to giving people just access to their one report and they can't go digging around, in other places. In those cases, we're seeing that Looker Studio is a better solution because it gives them a dashboard that they can access that can be filtered down to just the information that they need. And typically that's how we've been seeing things run. There's the web team that needs analytics. They need access to everything. If they get specific questions and person doesn't want a dashboard, they just want to know page views or something used a lot, they go in there and they grab it. And then there's other stakeholders who don't want to mess around in the GA dashboard that just have specific questions, or they have, reports for boards that are on an ongoing basis. That's where Looker Studio comes in. Those can be built out and customized to satisfy the reporting needs of specific groups that don't need direct access to GA. And that's the best solution we've seen so far for replicating that reporting framework, even though there's no more filtered views within Universal Analytics. And even when it comes to regular reporting, like views or not, that's typically what we see is there's a dashboard that you have certain stakeholders that have access to that's in Looker. And then you've got your regular reporting for your core web team in GA itself.
Thank you. Jordan, can I ask you to chime in on this?
Yeah, absolutely. And there was a question that came in through the Q&A too, just about Looker Studio. So just to answer that live, it used to be called Google Data Studio. It's essentially like a visualization platform for data, the main one being analytics data. So whether it's Universal Analytics or Analytics 4 data, you can also pull in data from Google Sheets or Excel or other platforms or your CRM, and then have them all in one place. You can blend them together in one dashboard, which makes it really nice and easy to use. But in terms of what reporting people are asking for on the paid side, it always is, how do my dollars, like what are they turning into? Am I wasting my budget? So, the Data Studio, Looker Studio platform is great at doing that, in that you can pull in cost data, you can pull in cost per click data, you can pull in overall impressions and clicks, and then also match that with the data from analytics to say, here's how they engaged on the site once they were there. Here's how many landing pages they hit from that cost data, and then also match that up to the conversion. So you can kind of follow that whole process from the initial click to the application, if that's the end goal.
Thank you. Since this is our last formal question before we move to the question and answer, I want to make sure, that we did cover all of the tracking options that are out there available, and then B, if there are any topics that we didn't cover that we wanted to before moving into the Q&A.
As far as tracking options go, GA4 gives you like I said, a lot more flexibility. One of the things that Beacon's doing that's already proving really fruitful is GA4 has the increased data limits. You can collect way more data. And what we're doing is installing tags that basically collect anytime you click on anything, buttons, images, PDFs, external links. And so we're able to then answer any question and anyone has about their website, you know, obscure page or not, we're able to produce that data. And it also provides us a fail-safe in case one of our specifically set up events like an apply button click break for whatever reason. So just in terms of like the flexibility and different bells and whistles in GA4, I think in general, as now everyone's trying to really use it more, we're discovering some of these benefits. But that's one of the main ones is just, you know, being able to track anything and everything you want really cleanly and simply is one of the main, so far, the big selling features for GA4.
Thank you. We do have one final poll question, and that question is, do you work with your enrollment department to determine if or how your web efforts impact the number of enrolled students? Thank you. 25% yes, 49% no, and 25% occasionally. We appreciate all this feedback, both for our panelists and the other attendees that are viewing the webinar. We do have questions in the question and answer section. What I'm going to do is take them in the order that I see them, and then if our panelists can do their best to answer. So the first one I see from James, and everyone, you can please let me know if some of these questions were already answered. But this is, events and goals have evolved into events and conversions in GA4. And there are some key differences in how these are handled between the two platforms. How has the transition changed how you analyze KPIs?
So one thing to actually mention, because we're getting this more and more from clients, is that there is a desire to compare GA4 data to universal data, which would make sense. If you don't have GA4 year over year or quarter over quarter, you're kind of blind. This is extremely difficult to do, and it's leading to a lot of confusion. So I think the paradigm shift, or at least for the next year, is that you probably need to compare this month to last month, or there can't be trying to look at GA4 data and compare it to universal data because it's collected so differently. The other thing is that conversions in GA4 up until maybe a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago now, counted every single time. So like Jordan was saying, if you press the apply button 5 times in universal, count once as a goal. In GA4, it would count for, for however many times you pressed it, it count that many times. There's a setting now in GA4 where you can have it count once per session, which makes it more aligned more with the way that it used to be counted. But still, considering the paradigm shift and how data is collected, you really can't compare GA4 data to universal data. And that's kind of why also now is the time to start understanding performance on GA4, because you can at least look at GA4 data and go, this was, universal said this was a good month. This is what GA4 data looks like for a good month, and start having those frames of reference because you really can't compare the two. And it's going to be, you're going to be able to rely on a lot more, industry trend data from like Google Trends. If you're running ad campaigns, there's information there from Google Ads on how things are running. There's going to be data from disparate systems that you're going to have to pull in until we get to a year over year where you can compare GA4 to GA4.
Thank you. Next question. What is the right way to set up conversions in GA4 if we weren't already using them in UA?
The right way. Well, there's conversations you need to have. For a lot of our clients, the fact that we can now turn conversions on once per session, that's the right way, not having it count every single time. But the way conversions work in GA4 is you set up an event and then you just toggle on or off that conversion. There's in Universal, you had a couple different options on if you want to track it via destination URL, an event, some other things. That's totally different in GA4. You just simply press a button and it turns it on as a conversion. So there really isn't a right or wrong way. It's more that you turn it on, then you decide how you want that conversion to count. And then you're off to the races.
I would say when it comes to the right, just make sure that a conversion is a conversion. Just because you have all this event data, if it is something that's really important, but you would just like to see how whatever that activity is impacts something else, that might be something you want to leave in as an event. But if it's something you need to report to deans or someone in management or someone else, and you have to report on successes, just realize that's probably an event that you want to toggle onto a conversion.
Great. Any special considerations for server-side delivery of GTM? Implementing this now, and the data quality seems to be so much more complete.
So I wouldn't say there's any special considerations at the moment. I think obviously the server-side stuff is coming. Chrome is going to stop supporting third-party cookies. I think 24, 25, I forget, it's coming. You're going to get better data because it's your data. It's not, being collected off of a cookie anymore. But as far as what we've done for clients, we haven't done a ton of the GTM server side. That's probably going to be happening more in year 2 as we look into also the data warehousing questions coming up as well. So right now we're really focused on getting it over with Tag Manager using cookies. And then once we kind of get past this hump, the server side stuff's coming because of a lot of the privacy controls. But you will get better data because of that.
Thank you. How to identify audiences how do you identify audiences like students, employees, and faculty?
The best way is to have some kind of clear sense self-identifier. So some schools have the drop down that's like IMA or Info 4. Those are really great because they kind of get you down into very specific journeys. It also really helps with personalization, going back to Clive. I mean, if you kind of know who someone is when they enter, you can do way more. So the starting point for that is going to be to make sure you've got a clear path for that user to identify who they are, and then take steps that you've predefined as importance that they lead to conversion. But it starts with the website and your content strategy and your design in order to make any of the tracking and any of the personalization happen.
Thank you. Exporting data to Excel gives some basic info, but colleagues ask for specific things from time to time. How can you access UA or older GA4 data that you can dig through for whatever is requested after Google no longer provides access?
Yeah. So this is where there's going to have to be some data warehousing conversations if you want to retain information longer than 14 months. I'll also say Google does have a paid version of analytics. It's called GA360. That one retains data for 50 months. So you get way more data retention. And they've recently gone through a repricing model. So in some cases, depending on your web traffic volume, it'd be not as crazy. It used to be like $150,000 to $175,000 a year. The pricing's changed depending on your site. So that's an option too. But if you don't want to go that route, BigQuery is an option where you can export and save your data, but there's going to have to be a data storage component if you're going to want to get to that data older than the 14-month save period.
We are struggling with the loss of views that were filtered by URI. What do you recommend for data reporting only on selected subsections of the website so that these site managers just get their data? GA4 doesn't seem to do this well on very large sites.
Yes, and this is where the Looker Studio solution is the best and only solution unless you want to go to something truly custom. You can create a Looker Studio report, have it just filtered down to that segment the same way the views used to filter down, and then you've got a dashboard that person can access and share at will.
How are you handling data thresholding in GA4?
So thresholding is happening for a number of reasons, just to kind of take a step back. You know, if there's low data sizes and there's personally identifiable information, it'll threshold, basically it'll withhold part of your information. The way to get around that is you got to go to the explorations in GA4. That will give you the full data set. So there are cases where Beacon is testing a site and there's a button that we're trying to test and it gets low volume and it won't show up in the main reports button. If you go to explore and you build up exploration there, that's where you'll see the full data. And so if that's, you know, getting that full data for testing or whatever reason is important, you got to go to the explorations, not the main part of reports.
Regarding conversions, should we assign a value to lead generation, RFI form submissions, conversions? I'd love to know what kind of value the range universities assign to this conversion.
So I would say that none of our clients are we assigning values to, and there's for a couple of reasons. One, most higher ed institutions don't know what that value is. Like, it's a hard number to get down to. And then also that number can change just based on enrollment numbers and budgets. And so because of that, we usually don't assign a value there. For other types of clients and businesses, it's different, but for higher education, that's not something that we are commonly doing when we set up conversions.
One of the things you can do, though, if you're running Google Ads, is you can actually do that lead scoring and assign values there. So we do that across the board. If you want to use any new automated bidding models and paid for higher ed, you really need to lead score everything. So a newsletter sign up or someone interacting with social would be lead scored very low. You don't need a dollar amount, though. You know, Google has let us know you can use a 1 to 100 score. You can use a 1 to 10, a 1 to 5, and it works the same. So there is an option for you to assign value there and make your paid campaigns work a little bit better for you.
Will a Cascade interface be able to show users analytics for a particular page or folder?
Yeah, so if you hook in with the analytics connector, you can look at individual analytics for the specific page. If you go up into more analytics, I believe it can do, there's an analytics report as well that'll give you a little bit deeper dive into those statistics.
What about things like page views and basic stats? Will this be comparable from historical UA to GA4?
The only thing that you can compare with confidence between the two are page views, and then for e-commerce purchases. Everything else will have at least a 10% difference, some greater than others, like sessions, conversions based on how you've got it set up, bounce rate. Those will all have a significantly different conversion value or value, like how it's computed, making it really difficult. So it's just page views and purchases that you can compare.
Is there any worry about running GA4 and UA at the same time? Would
No.
it double count things?
No, totally different code base. Anything that is GA4 will not go into Universal and vice versa.
I noticed the number of views for specific pages in UA is slightly different in GA4. Is that normal?
Yes. Yeah, that is a normal. It's a normal thing to see. It is because, you know, they do, it's also because how they count sessions, but I don't want to get into the weeds. It's going to be slightly different. Usually page views are going to be closer, it's safer, but it's still not going to be a 1-to-1.
Very good. Well, we are only 3 minutes over and we got through a lot of information plus quite a few questions. So hopefully I've kept my job for another webinar, but I want to thank all of the attendees for the questions that were submitted, and especially thank our panelists for giving the information. Chris, are there any final words we would like to exude before we close the webinar?
Yeah, again, thank you everybody for being here, for making this possible. If it wasn't for you, the attendees, this would be a one-sided conversation between the panelists. So we really appreciate you being a part of this. If you enjoyed this webinar, look out for more to come in the next couple of months. We have a webinar series going on at Hannon Hill. Thank you very much, Troy, for being our moderator. Again, you did a fantastic job. We really appreciate you. Thank you to the Beacon team for their insights. beautifully done. Andrea, wonderful with the question and answers at the end. Jordan, Christy, really appreciate you guys. And Graham, of course, my sidekick and sales engineer over here. Thank you for being a part of this. Everybody have a good Thursday. Have a good weekend. And
Chris, I forgot to say something. I think it's very important. If any of you would like additional information, I think if you would go to LinkedIn and make sure that you follow both the Beacon Technologies and the Hannon Hill pages. And I think most of our participants, if you had something that you wanted a specific answer on, would be willing to have conversations with you, and all of us can be found on LinkedIn. I consider myself a connector, and I invite all connections after the webinar. Excuse me, Chris, I just wanted to make sure we let everyone know that the conversation does not have to stop here.
Very good. Very good. If you have more questions, reach out to any of us and we'll be happy to answer them. Until next time, my friends, we'll see you soon. Goodbye.